Hey everyone, welcome back to I Would Like to Have a Conversation. And today we have an episode, with who?
Todd.
We do have an episode with Todd, and it's about pain. What pain is, how to exercise around pain, how to reduce pain, or everything's about pain. So Todd and I had a really good conversation about that. Cool?
Yeah.
So cool. Wanna say goodbye?
Bye.
Bye! Everyone, welcome back to I Would Like to Have a Conversation. Hey Todd, how's it going, dude?
Good, man. Everything's great. How are you?
Yeah, good, man. Let's start off with a weird one. I wanted to start off with this anyway. We talked about it. What's been your best workout the last week or so? What's been your favourite one?
I love like sometimes just a good pump.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've just been into so yesterday I had a really good one. It was mainly upper body. I like, instead of just doing like the splits and things like that, I like when even though it technically is a split, I like the way that they get designed when there's like 3 movements and it's like you have these 3 movements and X amount of reps to get done in 3 minutes. And essentially you have time to rest, and you do that for 4 sets. So I was able to, mine was like basically an upper push day. So I may not look super jacked, but I'm feeling like muscles are recovering from something. So that's fun. How about you?
I like that. I think mine was like a compromised running session. So I didn't overstretch on my hip, which is still giving me grief. But it was like 15% incline on the treadie, very, very slow. So the idea was like every 4 minutes, I went through this cycle of 10 calories on the echo bike or the ski erg. I just swapped between the 2 each round. And then I did a pull up, and I just did this thing where I do hand changes. So I learned it from my OCR coach when I started doing OCR. You do a pull up and then you just change your hands 10 times to mimic like doing a monkey bar, and then do another pull up. So I do that, and then I jump back on the treadie. I just finish out whatever's left in the 4 minutes at a really steady pace. I just repeat that for whatever time frame I want to do it for. And I've been watching the Diamond League, the athletics on YouTube, which is like the professional running league or professional track and field league in Europe. And they've got all they literally have all the finals of every event in like a 2-hour YouTube video. It's awesome. It's like watching the Olympics every time. So I pretty much just put that on the TV while I'm running on the treadmill and pretend I'm fast.
Yeah. One of my favorite memes or whatever when the Olympics come around is this. Somebody always posts this meme and it says, "Can you please let like an ordinary person do these events before these Olympians so we can actually see how hard it is?"
Yeah. It was like, it was one layer of the 2,000 meter race, which even they said that doesn't happen very much. Like it's very rare. They're either like the mile or it goes up to 5Ks. But it was a 2,000 meter race, and they had the pace setters out in front, and there was an Aussie in it. I'm like, I wonder how we go. Like I don't get too excited. Like we have 1 or 2 Aussies that do all right, but it's usually the Americans and for the short stuff, and then like the South Africans for the really long stuff. And then, they had the pace setters around, and she was sitting behind them, and they were just tearing away from the pack. I was like, "Ooh, this is cool." I was like, she must be a pace setter. And then the others dumped off. She ended up taking over one of the pace setters. The others all disappeared, and she won by like 50 meters and got the world record. I was just like, what? World record. Like it is really cool. But the world record of a race that rarely ever gets run. But yeah, she killed it. And she finished, all smiles, walked around talking, like literally just ran flat stick for 2Ks. It was fine. Just a different level of fitness.
Yeah, just a little bit different.
Yeah. And today, Todd and I were just talking about it before. It's funny. We always, I don't know, just so there's like insight into what we do. We get on, we start this before we press record, we look at each other and go, what do you want to talk about today? it's always cool because I like it because we don't have to pre-plan and try and, like we say, like force the conversation into a certain area. We're just like, let's just let it run. And today, I want to talk about pain, well, mainly more about injury, I guess, where, like I just mentioned, I have like a hip issue and I went and got an MRI and I've got a torn labrum and bursitis of the hip. And I went and saw the osteo here and he released it. It felt really good. I was like, oh, this could be it. We might have figured it out. And he did some stuff. I'm like, this is good. And it was 3-4 days, my hips started to get tight again, playing up again. So we wanted to sort of have a conversation around, well, I guess I want to ask you a question and you can share your insights on stuff about injury management, best practices, things they can do. Like I always like the idea of like having things that you can come to someone like you with that you've already done. I've tried this, this, and this, and this. So you can sort of go, oh, cool. Like this is good. It's kind of like when you go to a doctor and you always say, you go there. I'm always like do things before you get there. So you're actually getting what you like your money's worth when you are there, so to speak. Instead of just going there and like the one is like the going to see a psychologist or a therapist and you're like feeling a bit depressed or down or whatever. And then, like one of a lot of the first things they usually ask is like, are you exercising? Are you eating well? How's your sleep? So I was like, bring that ammo with you. Like, this is what I'm doing. This is what it looks like. So yeah, like just a little bit, well, actually give people background into what you do and your approach. And then we can sort of dive into some questions from that. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a chiropractor by trade, if you will. And I've always been involved in sports. So it just made sense, for me to treat that population. My, and a lot of that stems from, I'll try to keep this organized in my head. A lot of that stems from, wishing like, I had somebody on my side growing up, encouraging me to take care of my body in many different ways, whether it's actually getting into the weight room and building strength, because I didn't do any of that. I think to a certain extent I was naturally strong, like naturally athletic to the extent that I was without anything outside of like normal practices, if you will. Like I spent a lot of
Yeah.
time shooting basketball with my sport. I spent a lot of time shooting stuff like that, playing like AAU and all these other things. But there wasn't a lot of times that I like was very regimented in regards to, as you can tell, I'm probably a little bitter that I didn't spend this time working on my skill set, because I think maybe there's a possibility I could have went beyond just the Division 3 that I played. Anyways, so
That's like dad talk. That's dad talk 101. If
Yeah.
I put my time in, I would have
Right.
been at the Olympics. Oh, I would have been there.
I've definitely been in the Olympics. Um, so chiropractor by trade, treating athletes, and now I'm treating mostly like chronic pain patients, through this adhesion release. So adhesion is basically scar tissue that builds up over time. And in cases like yours, because I already shared with you, I wish
Yeah.
I could there and release the adhesion so we could take the pressure off the bursa and the labrum. But anyways, inside the office, that's what I do. I'm very hands-on. It's a very aggressive treatment, but very effective for people who want permanent pain relief to some degree. I couple that with, now we're going on like 6, 7, 8 years almost, where, I did work for another company called Active Life. Shout out. They're still, international, if you will, where we would program for people all over the world. And I actually had a client in New Zealand and, Guam. It was the country of Qatar. Just a really cool experience, like meeting all these people and essentially after about 3 or 4 years. So my approach, and where I gained a lot from working with Active Life and the chiros and doctor of physical therapies that work there, were essentially like, we want to build this hierarchy. Okay. So the first thing that I really like to work on is I like to actually take a look at breath and your breath mechanics. Because that to me is the foundation to everything. So if you're not breathing very well, both mechanically and from a cadence standpoint, if we're looking at this, well, it's not even just the athletic side of it. Your overall health depends on how well you breathe. Um,
How would you
if you,
describe that? Like, what is good breathing?
yeah, that's great. Well, I think nowadays, like belly breathing is incomplete. Okay.
Mm.
I think at the start for people, but it's incomplete. Generally, like the way I like to think of it is if you take the bottom of your ribs and then the top of your pelvis, okay, we
Mm.
need to make sure that like if we're looking, down this way, that they're aligned. All right. We need to make sure that like they're not tilted in certain ways because there's some, compensatory breathing patterns that can happen from that or be the cause of that. So generally, what I like to tell people is you're filling up a canister um,
Mm.
between those ribs and that pelvis. You have this canister, and what you're trying to do is because your diaphragm comes down and out, you want to be filling up the canister in 360 degrees. Now, there's stages to help people progress to that, but that makes a huge difference because you're in pain, that can also reduce like your response to pain. So breathing is such a huge piece of like what we're doing along the pathway. Then the next thing that I'm going to go look at is your mobility and flexibility. So
Mm.
flexibility is going to be your passive range of motion, and then your mobility is your active range of motion. The reason why the passive is so important is because I want to know what capability your joint actually has without it being under load, because then that starts to tell me, all right, do we got some degeneration? Do we got some, maybe some, interesting things from birth? What is actually going on, inside this joint and how well does it function without load?
Mm.
Then we're going to take a look at your mobility. So how well can you move your joints and tissue through space? And then the next thing that we're going to look at is strength balances. So essentially what I'm looking at is I like to break it down into the like 5 movement patterns. So we have push, pull, squat, hinge, and carry. And for the most part, I use that, but I've also added in a lot of like rotational stuff. Though that right now has been a little bit tricky for me to put, um, to kind of bundle up with the strength ratios, like we understand. Charles
Mm.
Pollock, if you're familiar with Charles Poliquin and his work, so he noticed with his athletes, I want to bring this all together so that people understand
Nah.
what is strength ratios. So Charles Poliquin did this work where with his lifters, he noticed that there were a certain population of his lifters that didn't get injured, either as frequently or as much. And what he
Mm.
noticed was their numbers, meaning their squat compared to their deadlift, compared to their push, compared to their pull movements, were in a certain ratio to each other. And that information got passed on to actually a colleague of mine and a friend of mine, Corey Duvall. And then Corey Duvall actually like we adopted it from Corey
Yeah, cool.
through Active Life. So we literally had an app that
Mm.
had this algorithm, and when you punched in your numbers, it told you where you were deficient at.
That's
So
cool.
I understand those numbers enough now and I can just generally with what people are experiencing, I can say, hey, listen, you probably have some weak hamstrings relative to like your quads and stuff. That's why your knees hurt, blah, blah, blah. So that's a little window into the strength ratios. Um, and then after that, this is a really cool one. And I'm considering moving this. This one can become a priority for people right off the bat if they're overtraining and under recovery. But
Mm.
the next thing that we look at is your work to rest ratio and or work recovery ratio. And then the last part is going to be skill set, which is typically things that I don't look at that by that point. Once I feel like I've created a really strong foundation of these things, then I'm like, your coach can have you now. Go build the skill development that you need with those things. And so that's my approach from a rehab standpoint. Inside the office, the first line of defense is the soft tissue work. So the manual soft tissue and using the shock wave or pressure wave. And then again, that's the way I'm going to approach like an injury. Now, The last thing I'll say to that I had left active life like going on, I think 3 years now. And what I've learned over that time is you can have all of this stuff, right? You can have a pathway, but you're still dealing with a human on the other end.
Yeah.
And so, I think, you and I have discussed this, just like any like really great coach, it's learning to understand like psychology and, and really try to like listen and hear where people are at. And that's one of the most, just important things. I can, be blue in the face and tell them all of my pathway, but in the end, like there's so many different layers that need to be peeled back. And for people who are especially in chronic pain, part of your rehab is going to be almost like exposure therapy because your brain's already going to be lit up. That tissue may not be experiencing damage, but there's going to be some fear and there's going to be, some resistance to rebuilding this foundation and these movement patterns. And so I I'm not saying like I'm a psychologist but there's that aspect that I have to be mindful of as we're navigating the rehab process. Especially even in like people in chronic pain in the clinic. It's so important to give them the education about what they're experiencing, what they're going to experience. So that way it builds trust. Because if they can walk out of my office knowing that I understand that they're not going to be drastically better after a visit or two, then and I can set up that expectation just like with the online rehab that I do, then um, people tend to be more bought in. And then whatever they need to work through psychologically, it just makes it easier on them.
Let's talk more about that because that's super interesting in the sense of like you just there's people listening out of our 6 listeners. The like someone's in chronic pain or they've had pain for a very long time. I was listening to a podcast with Andrew Hume and Stu McGill the other day, and Stu was talking about this stuff as well. And he was talking about like he was doing an assessment on someone and he was just touching their back and he was like, oh yeah, that's really painful. And then he got a feather and just brushed it super lightly across the back and like, oh, that's painful. Like the trigger's just the same every time. And he talked about desensitizing and stuff like that. But someone, like, if you could get a message across to someone who's dealt with pain for a very long time, what would you, if you were talking to him right now, what would you say to him? Like, I know it's sort of hard because you don't know what the pain is, but
Yeah, I think generally if what I told them landed and stuck and they believed it, I would tell them that your body has the ability to heal.
mm,
You don't believe that? No, but nothing's going to help you. That's like and that's really what I try to get out of even like my nutrition clients. If you don't believe that your identity can change, and if you don't believe that like you see yourself doing this 5 years from now, don't bother jumping in right now until you've done that work. Um, or at least you have some sense of that belief. And that's like the one thing I would love for people to know is, and then to quickly follow up that with be willing to do whatever it takes. You might have some metabolic issues. You might have some
mm,
internal you might have some inflammation issues. But I truly believe that the body can heal, whether it's through the adhesion work that I do, the rehab stuff that I do, and my spiritual background. I truly believe that with enough work, you can heal. Just get curious and be consistent and patient. That's where I would start. And that would be my hope and wish is that people knew that. And I
yeah,
unfortunately think that there for some people who are just like they say that they feel like they can be healed. But I still think that there's a deeply, subconscious, like something's rooted in this belief that they can't.
mm,
And I've just seen that through the conversations that I've had with people. That would be the one thing that if it stuck and it landed and it's planted a seed to help them shift their mind, that would be the first thing I would say to people.
it's pretty big because it's kind of like I've mentioned it many times in King's Crew, we're literally talking about our story and it ties in so much with like what you said with like you can change if you wanted to change, like your identity and your values and the way you talk about yourself. It's kind of like that story of like, which is really hard. And I get it. People in pain, especially when it's chronic pain, it's really hard to shift it. It's kind of, I wanted to sort of put it in the thought process of people when you practice doing this stuff. So, like you said, nutrition or a diet or going to a chiro, an osteo, physio, whatever, and you try something and it works for a little bit and then it stops because you stop or the pain increase back or whatever. There's kind of like two paths you can go. Whereas like the story is like, I'm going to be stuck like this forever and it's going to repeat. Or it's kind of like, cool, experiment, like what's the next domino I've got to try and knock over? And using the analogy for, not the analogy, but using myself as an example, I've done a lot of diets and different things, and I've always trained and exercised and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't until I started changing the story that I was telling myself that I was able to start making things work longer term and start rewiring stuff. And that took a lot of dominoes of like just testing shit out, literally just like throwing shit at the wall and see what's stuck. And then just kind of getting a little bit frustrated, like, why am I constantly just having to try all these different things and nothing ever seems to stick? And it was me. It was my head. The story was playing out, which is my subconscious story. So that'd be huge, I think, for people to understand is like just smashing yourself like in the face with like, I can change. I can change it. I can change it. I can change it. Like do it every day. Like it will get better. It'll get better. The other thing I was thinking of was like timelines and expectation where like for me right now, I've got this niggling hip injury. It's been going on. I think I've missed 5 soccer games now. It's better, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, which I've had bursitis before and it just took time. It's just stretching timelines. When you eat it, it sucks. Like a week feels like forever.
Right.
But when you look back, like I've had a surgery on my wrist and that was like 16 weeks. I was in like in a cast to get like as it was a skateboard just to get it to knit back together again. And at the time I thought it was the worst thing in the world. And when I look back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, it was cool. Like what age? It was like 16 weeks. So it's hard for him to hear, but you would see this a lot, I would reckon, like the expectation versus reality, like what it takes to create that space for change.
Yeah. It makes me, one of the clients that I had, he came to me fresh off of a discectomy. So for, um, the, the millions of listeners out there, with the discectomy, essentially, your disc is like, think of, like the inside of a tree. We got these rings, but inside the middle is actually some jelly. Okay. Um, and essentially that jelly has like pushed through those rings and, sometimes they can calcify out there. And anyways, a discectomy is when they go in and remove just the gel, so that your disc is still there and they don't remove any other parts. Um, And we got started, not typical. I usually tell them to go through some other like post-surgical PT, but, we had already built a rapport and he trusted me. And so it was about 2 or 3 weeks after surgery, we started doing some basic stuff. And then, about 4 to 5 months in, he's like got some, maybe a little residual pain, things like that. But he starts, hey, what can I do? Well, like, what am I capable of? Like, how long is this going to last? And I said, listen, like intuitively, you'll understand what your body's capable of. And that's what's going to dictate when we can part ways. And which I think that, as far as like, this was pretty impressive. We had to rebuild a ton of foundational stuff and improve his mobility and then over time increase his capacity. But from start to finish, 8 months post post surgical discectomy, he was like literally deadlifting and squatting over 300 pounds for each. So, and for some,
That's
they may
pretty
consider, yeah, they might consider that a quick timeline, but they didn't see, the 7 months of us just like really slowly building, we just worked on isometric stuff. We worked on just basic cat camel, a lot of like, these very basic PT type movements. And then just gradually we're able to work and work ourselves up, but we rebuilt the capacity too. So we didn't just jump into squatting at like 50%. Like we started with air squatting and we literally just slowly built that back up. So that's what I think of as like, that might even be shorter for some people as far as like what they expect the timeline to be. But he was all in and he made sure that like his sleep and his recovery and everything else was on point because this had been like his second episode with his back and he just didn't want to deal with this in the future anymore. So, um, yeah, it's tough. Inside the clinic, when people are in chronic pain, we do a series of tests to basically determine their function. And that lets us know like where we can start looking for this adhesion because this adhesion is going to weaken muscle and it's going to actually limit range of motion. So we always tell every client patient that generally you're going to see function improve before symptoms improve. And our goal is to try to get people at least 50% better within like 5 to 8 visits. Um, but at the same time, like, if we're dealing with some metabolic stuff, if there's just a whole slew of things that's causing this person to be super inflamed and, some of these other problems, what my job is not just physically to help these people get out of pain, but I truly believe that my job is to tell this person, hey, a big part of the reason why you're inflamed is because of your diet. A big part of the reason why you're inflamed is because you haven't learned how to mitigate your own stress, and cope with that. So having that hard conversation, is also something I think is really important as far as setting up expectations. And I know that that's what the question was ultimately about. Yes, it's to answer that question directly, it can be, but what it's just like anything else. The more experience you have with certain conditions, maybe certain like personality types, things like that, you can start to you can get a lot more accurate with what you expect the timeline to be.
Yeah.
Um, but it's I mean, as you know, as a nutrition coach, it's tough because when people get thrown things in their life and they're not, I don't want to say they're not prepared, but you just understand when, someone has this idea of like their weight loss is going great. And then, some weekend comes along and it throws everything off and it takes like two weeks to like regroup. The same thing can happen when it comes to pain. You can have a flare up that's expected. Um, there's just going to be some of those things and it's just trying to reduce and limit those things. So that way your timeline it just is what it is. That's like the best way to put it. But yeah, there sometimes can be a huge misconception. And the reason for that is to finally like answer this is because most of the time that people have an injury, their history with that similar injury or pain didn't last as long. So they don't understand why it's lasting longer this time.
Mm.
And so the education process on why this is, you know, the big one and why your brain is putting off so much pain is an important conversation for those people. And why too, they're like, you got to go back to the drawing board and rebuild a foundation. That's the biggest thing I see in the rehab process is like so many people don't have the patience to rebuild the foundation that wasn't really there to begin with. Um, and I often think about, when people look at like Matt Frazier and Rich Froning and they see all the, like these crazy workouts, right? What they're not seeing is the 2 to 3 other hours that they're putting in doing what people might consider accessory stuff, right? There's a reason why they're strong. There's a reason why they're fast. There's a reason why they're metabolically fit. And the same concept goes towards your injury is, are you sleeping well? Are you recovering? Are you putting good food? And if you're not, hey, don't expect, like things to look so well. And that's why some people can recover well and fast, and some people it takes longer. But having that conversation is important. So there's a
Yeah.
long, drawn out answer.
I think it's good to bring up all that stuff too, in the sense of, when it's all the cards are on the table, like you just sort of laid it out. Like, is your sleep good? Is your food good? Inflammation, all that kind of stuff. Like, when the cards are on the table, for me specifically, like when that happens to be, like these are all the things that we need to look at. It's like, and it's kind of like, where are you willing to put the work in? And that sort of dictates the timeline. Like, cool, we can just do this every week when you come see me, but it could take a long time for it to work. There's like my mate, he's an osteo, Born. He's always like, he always talks to me about his frustrations. Like, if people just did the work outside the sessions, they would get better so much quicker. And I'd only have to see him maybe once or twice. But it's just getting that buy-in on doing the work. And it is challenging because, well, look at it, the other, like the big why. Like when we talk about, when we do transformations with people, like, yeah, calorie tracking. We were talking about this before. Calorie tracking. Go track calories. And it's like, no. I don't, why? And then when they got a big reason why, it starts making it a little bit easier to show up and do the thing because you focus on that rather than the exercise. And do you feel it's kind of the same with like a better rehab, the stuff they've got to do? And it could be nutritionally or whatever, but they're in pain. Their big why is they want to get out of pain. But is that enough for people to do the rehab? I guess it is for some people, but what do you sort of see?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, so I to we know that people don't just want to lose weight, right?
Really? Yeah.
Like they want to lose weight because, and it's the same thing that people don't just want to get out of pain. And I know people might be like, "Oh, you're crazy. If I'm in pain, I want to get out of." No, the reason why you actually want to get out of pain is because it's hindering you from doing something that you want in your life.
Mm.
And the same thing with being overweight is, like, you want to be able to look in the mirror and go, damn, that person looks great naked, underlying it all. That's, people want to be able to do that. They want to take their shirt off, at the pool or whatever it is. It's the same thing with being injured. There is something that this is preventing them from doing that they love. And it's making sure that we can anchor that. Now, acute injuries, depending on the injury, is a little bit different than a chronic issue, because for what I find in chronic cases is that people have forgotten why they're getting out of pain.
Mm.
Like they've just been in pain so long that I don't want to say immune to it. They still feel things. But the pain is really just kind of distorted inside their brain and inside their body. And I think that they've lost sight of why they want to get out of pain. And it's just like what we have to do for people who maybe been on this weight loss roller coaster for years, is re-anchor them to that. The reason why it can be difficult is because when you've tried so many things, again, the correlations between the two,
Mm.
and they haven't worked, then you tend to take that really, really, you tend to take that burden on, and you feel like we had talked about from the beginning, that I'll never be able to do this. These things didn't work for me. I must be the problem. And if you were to, I guess if you were to ask me, I would include all that. If you were to ask me again, what I want people to know is, despite what you've been through, somebody either hasn't done the right thing for you or hasn't presented your path to you in a way that helps you understand what it's going to take to get there.
Yes.
And then accept that that's what it's going to take, and be willing to do that, which is another piece, because there are some people that just aren't willing to do that either. I've seen people come in here and be in pain. They have no interest in doing anything else other than hoping that I can get rid of their pain. So I'll leave it at that.
That's probably a good thing to touch on, where, like, yeah, I see it in my world. Like, it's the, I guess, outsourcing the work, uh, outsourcing the motivation, and band-aids, kind of hoping for a band-aid where we know band-aids are just there to stop the bleeding. It doesn't really improve on the thing. So yeah, it's a good, like, we probably shouldn't go into it because we might get some hate for it. But the idea is like, I really like that conversation. Like, it'd be interesting to dive deeper into that part of like why. Well, it is. It's just a lack of why, isn't it? I was just thinking about it, like which probably could be like pain, be like massive amounts of pain. It could be hard to see the potential of what you could do because you're like, I can't even see myself getting up and down the floor. Like, what do you mean I'm going to be able to walk up a hill or walk up the stairs? So it could be really hard. And it'd be like, for me, my thing has always been, especially when to do rehab exercises, like I'm doing like this, the McGill 3 and all these mobility banded exercises for my hip, just to do those things, which aren't as exciting as being able to do trap bar deadlifts and burpees and box jumps and all that fun stuff I love doing. There's milestones for me and chunking it down. We've talked about before in another episode, we can link it the 5-minute thing. I take whatever they give me in rehab. I'm like, it's going into a 5-minute window. I'm just going to set a time of 5 minutes and do as much rehab as I can in that 5-minute window. And then I'm out and I'll go do something else. That helped me a lot to sort of, I'm the same as everybody else. I don't enjoy doing rehab. It's not the most enjoyable thing. I could do it if I'm with someone and everyone's doing it, but doing it myself, I'm like, I could be doing something else here, which is, I would think in my head, the story I would say is more beneficial, even though the rehab that I'm doing and prehab is the stuff I need to be doing. So the 5-minute thing has been huge for me. And also just doing it at a time where I'm just kind of brain dead, where I'm just not really doing anything anyway, like sitting around. I might as well just get down and do that for 5 minutes and then I can just sit around again. So at the end of the day or very early in the morning when my brain's not woken up yet. That was a bit of a tangent.
Yeah,
You go.
one thing there's two things in there. One thing I'll challenge you on is as long as you're still in tune with your body and you're purposefully going through those exercises
Yes.
is important. So, because what
Yeah.
I've noticed is like people can check out and, the mind
Just
muscle
phone it in.
connection is extremely important. The second thing I'll say is it's just like with weight loss. Like if we can help someone establish their deeper why, through the rehab process or even through the weight loss process, let's think of somebody that you had just shared in the rehab process. They're in chronic pain. Maybe they've recently have had this like huge flare up in this big episode. Like they are almost bedridden. It's really difficult for them to do anything. Same thing with somebody who's been trying to lose weight for years and, they're X amount overweight and they're just exhausted from trying all these things for so long. What happens over time, it's just like in the rehab process, is we start leaving like little cookie crumbs of success, right?
Mm.
That's what I have to do inside the rehab process too and even in the chronic pain patients, I say, listen, like what's going to happen over the next couple weeks, even to potential month, is I'm going to ask you to find like the smallest wins that you can consider a win. And that may be that, if I've been waking up with pain and it's been an 8 out of 10, if that drops to a 7.5 or a 7, like that's important to know. If there were movements where, say, like you were trying to bend over to pick up your kid and it hurt like an 8 out of 10 and now it only hurts a 6 out of 10. Yes, you're still in pain, but those are the little wins that are going to tell us that we're moving in the right direction. Same thing with the rehab. How do we build that confidence, right? All right, I'm going to have you go do these type of exercises. You're going to come back to me and you're going to tell me you were able to do them. Well, now guess what we're doing? We're building your capacity back up. We're also fixing some movement pattern things and strengthening tissue and, improving the mobility. But the same thing with weight loss. Like let's get things rolling in the beginning. Let's get maybe some pounds lost. Let's lose the first 5 of, the glycogen stores and the water and all that. Like, that's why I always tell people, I was like, that's the part that we want because now you're going to dip into your fat. I was
Mm.
like, so, having the 5 pound, I'm also realistic with people, right? Like, I'm like, hey, that five wasn't really probably 5 pounds, but, that's what we needed, but anyways, if we can get them, seeing that this is possible, now we're leaving clues. And that's the biggest thing with people in the rehab and chronic pain space is, they're going to hit a ceiling, and that ceiling could be a limiting belief, or it could be something where their body just can't do. And we want to be able to help them move past that in a way that makes sense to them. But obviously, isn't going to put them at any more risk. So, all that, that's what I wanted to say in regards to what you had shared.
Yeah, I agree. Like I was thinking, I got to side where you said like intention of movement and doing again, the Big Hill 3, which for everyone listening is like the bird dog, which when people do it, and I used to always get it when I was a coach. It's like, this exercise is dumb. It doesn't do anything. I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah.
And then the side plank off your knees, which again, people say it's too easy. I'm like, uh-huh. And then the Big Hill curl up, which looks like you literally do nothing. And when you get it right, it just works so well.
Yeah.
Um, like I did it, started doing it again. This is like my injury pattern. I copied injury, I resort back to the McGill 3 and just get my cylinder, my core back in alignment while I'm doing all the other stuff. And this literally is my pattern all the time. Because I always just see like when I do that and then everything else works faster because my center of gravity, I guess, is more in tune. But every time I go back to the start, I'll go back to very simple, like holding for 10 seconds, do it for 6 reps, and then I'm like 4 and then 2. I'll do that and then sort of scale it up. I'm sweating buckets. It's like when you do it right,
Yeah.
I guess it's a bit of a tangent, but when you do it right, like, I always forget about it. And when I start doing it again, like I forget how intense it is when you do it the right way and do things with intention, which sometimes does take like someone there manipulating little things to help you get into those right positions. But like if you could, I'll put a link in the show notes of Brian Carroll, who like nearly broke his back and then went and saw Stu McGill and did the McGill 3. Stu McGill's a professor from Canada.
Yeah.
Anyway, he wrote a book called Bat Mechanic and he's like unbelievable. And he has like a full book on like assessments you can test on yourself. But anyway, the back from injury or return from injury or whatever that book was called with him and Brian Carroll, Brian stuffed his back so bad he couldn't even do a baby crawl on the floor. And then the book literally plots out the journey from that to Brian being able to get the world record in a squat, which he was wearing a suit, but he was got the world record in a squat, which is 1,300 pounds, which is insane. Like 1,300 pounds on your back, he was able to squat. And this guy couldn't do anything without the amount of pain he was in. So, and I was watching a video of him talking about McGill 3 and the tension that it should feel like. You should feel sweaty and you should feel like a little bit when you do it. So yeah, I totally agree. Bringing it back to what you said, like the intention of the movement. Yeah, like I've found myself sometimes just phoning it in and just doing it. And I'm like, well, that was a complete waste of time. And
Yeah.
I'll try to do it. I'll try and do it again, even just one more set with intention. It's normal. Everyone does it. Like I do it in workouts. I do workouts where I just phone it in because I'm just cooked for
Yeah.
whatever reason. Something else is going on. I'll just do a half-assed effort with safe movements. I guess that's another thing we could talk about. Like, what is your belief in the idea of like getting them to train the things they can train?
Yeah. Cause that's going to build confidence, but we have to also keep in mind that we're not also, potentially overtraining, a repetitive pattern that they may already be strong in.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's what, that's where I think people cherry pick like CrossFit workouts and stuff like, they don't realize like they get it in their head where they're just like, okay, well, I'm moving and that's better than the person sitting on the couch or me not moving. But they don't realize that like the deeper you dive into the movement world and the pain world, that, repetitive injuries are a thing and muscle imbalances are a thing. And so when you continue to repeat certain patterns, that can be an issue in and of itself. But like directly to your point, when people ask me questions, my mind, it wants to cover everything and tell
Yeah, it does.
everything. Um, because I generally just think that there's going to be, people out there asking this question and I'm kind of answering them ahead of time. But, um, yes, I mean, like I said before, like I think a big part of rehab is exposure therapy. But also like, even in the clinic, if, someone with a disc injury, if they can walk, you're going to go walk and that's going to be your exercise. And because movement in and of itself is really powerful, but so are isometrics. I'm a GOTA certified coach. People can go down that rabbit hole if they want. So GOATA. Um, and a big part of that training are isometric. Well, we know from research that isometrics are really good for pain relief to a degree. And so like you see in the holds, like essentially like the bird dog and side plank are isometric movements to a
Mm.
degree. And doing isometric stuff is something that can be helpful and kind of reduce like the perception of the pain in the brain. Yeah, what's really important is making sure that it's like getting kicked off the horse. Like figure out a way to get back on it as soon as possible. It may look a little different. You may, or I'll even the first time I went skiing, right? Like I needed ski lessons. I was a 30 some year old, guy who didn't know how to ski. Well, like I either had a choice at that point where I was like, well, this sucks. I can't even get down the bunny hill. Or my wife's like, go learn this lesson.
Mm.
And I think like what I'm trying to share there is that like when you're in pain, there is a lesson. And whatever that lesson is, we got to learn it. But you can't just sit and sulk. You gotta get back up and start moving. And so, but that's gonna, like you said, that's gonna look differently for each person. So somebody with a disc injury, I don't want them loading that. I don't want them sitting for too long. They're gonna go walk. But somebody who has like maybe a tendinosis issue in their right quad. So this is pain generally you're gonna feel a little achy when you wake up. It's gonna feel a little achy when you get going, feel better as you move, feel achy when you go up and down stairs later. If anybody followed that. That's more
Mhm.
tendinosis. That's not gonna be a joint problem, and that is actually gonna do better with load and time under tension. So, yes, there's gonna be things that we can get people to do, but I think it goes back and circles back to your conversation about, um, like, how bought in are you? Because you may have to do these, big threes for a little while or whatever it is, until you can your brain you build that confidence in your brain that you can start to move in other ways. So,
Yeah, it's kind of, I like that. Like you said, build confidence in your brain so you can do stuff in other ways. And that brings you back to the concept that my mate here taught me. I can't remember where he learned it from, but the idea of the movement bubble. So when you're injured, your bubble gets really small, but there's still something you can do inside that bubble, which won't reduce the size of this bubble. And then when you play around in that safe area, your brain starts allowing the bubble to get bigger and bigger and bigger because it's like, oh, okay, safe. This is going to be all right. And that for me was huge in the sense of when I had an injury on my back and I was just neglecting stuff. I wasn't doing the right enough mobility, like most people probably do. And I was doing a workout and I was out the front of the house doing wall balls against the garage and my back just went. I just clapped. I literally collapsed on the floor and the wall ball hit me in the face. And then I was just lying on the floor and I could barely move. So I crawled back inside, pushing the wall ball back in and then just sort of lie there on the floor. And I couldn't really do anything for like 1 or 2 days. And I just picked up this video on from Kelly Starrett. And he's like, injured your back? Okay. It's just protecting you. Let's try and remind it that you're all right. And there was like 3 movements. This is me. Like I couldn't really get off the floor or anything. It was that bad. 3 movements was like a pelvic realignment, a gut smash, and then a QL massage with the ball. And just did those 3. And then I was out mowing the lawn later on that day. It was just that realignment and mainly just telling my brain is like, I'm actually all right. Like you're just out of sorts, but you movement bubble for me is what I teach when I coach people online. Is like movement bubble is what feels good that isn't painful. And it could mean like half reps or whatever it is, but allow your body to understand what movement feels good. And then it can release you into more movement over time. And then also go see a therapist to
Yeah.
make sure that you haven't got shit that's locking you down and not going to hurt yourself anyway. But the movement bubble was like a huge aha moment for a lot of people. Like just stay inside your happy place so you can keep showing up and it doesn't get smaller, and then go get work done. So if you want to go do these bigger movements, you don't have to, but if you want to, go get yourself checked out and find out why you can't do these bigger things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thought it was.
Well, well, the last, I'll share this example. And if anybody's listening, and a big CrossFit fan, I won't mention her name, but one of my clients was at the time, a 4-time masters champion, and she had injured her
Ah,
shoulder. And so again, somebody who was like post-surgical PT, she comes to me and we are rehabbing her shoulder, and it was torturous for her because she is used to training at such a high level that
okay.
her movement bubble, and it's interesting. I didn't label it the movement bubble, but I had these conversations with her. I said, listen, your arena was the CrossFit Games. Like that was your stage. I said, but guess what your stage is now? I was like, it's your garage, it's your gym, whatever, wherever you're at, and figure out a way to channel whatever energy you put into doing a million reps of something and or
Yeah.
3 workouts in one day. Like channel that energy into how you can show up in your rehab. And the cool thing was, a year later, she won her 5th Masters champion.
It's
So
pretty bad.
yeah, just a really cool, but just kind of drive home the whole like movement bubble. Like you can still move, and that's what I think even goes back to the red light.
Mm, mm.
Right? It's like what can you still do even though there's a crisis going on in your life? Like how can you still show up and show up for yourself? And I think there was just so many correlations between that rehab and weight loss, and it's just really cool to see.
So, Brandon, question: do you or would you do calls with people about this shit? Like if they're not anywhere near you and they're not going to literally fly to you, for all our millions of listeners, is there an ability to then to call you to talk through shit and then get ideas of what they could do?
Yeah, I mean, I well, generally the way my process goes, so I know I do like weight loss and nutrition, but I also do stuff that's specifically to help people get out of pain. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's going to be a similar process. I'll have a consult with people. I generally don't charge for it, because it hasn't been like my mainstay. I imagine somewhere down the line, like if if and when like that built up to the point where I had to put maybe like a just because of my time, and the consults can take a while depending on what's going on with people. I want to make sure, but yeah, I don't mind, if there's a big enough need to, maybe I open up like an open forum where people can come. But yeah, I don't mind people reaching out and setting up a call with me. And if it was something that they wanted to move forward with, great. If not, then just like with our nutrition coaching, like I can give them some things to work on, but just know that it may only get them so far. Um, so yeah, I have no problem like having conversations with people. Um,
I think that'd be a good idea. Like if someone's listening and you're like, yeah, shit, I've been in pain for a while.
yeah,
Just even just message Todd on socials. Again, we'll put it all on the show notes. And then, but yeah, reach out to him and ask him questions. And there's like apps and things which are really, really good for like practicing mobility and doing things. Like I use GoWard and the mobility coach, which is the ready state. I use those two interchangeably. And I just plug in like, where's my niggle? And it gives me ideas of what I can do. But there's always things that can be done. But yeah, if you want, if you got questions and maybe want an idea of who you could go to locally, Oz Network is really good. So he can point you in the right direction of to talk to. And I would guess is like the right questions to ask. Like, so if they are going to go see someone and they're local, they can't go to one of the people you recommend. It's like, cool. Well, these are the things you can kind of ask them.
Yeah.
Look at. That'd be
Yeah,
fun.
whenever I can. Like I do have a network. The Asian doctors are all over the world. We have some in the UK. We actually have one in Australia. Um, and then as far as like the movement aspect, I mean, yeah, the biggest thing I'll be able to do is decide whether you should get you should get hands-on treatment versus, hey, I think this is something that, somebody who does work with the rehab and pain can help you through and navigate. So, and the biggest thing I'll say too is oftentimes like your local PTs, this isn't to knock on them. Their goal is to just get you out of pain, which might seem like it's the goal, but ultimately what I have found is I can get you out of pain, but that doesn't get you back to doing what you want to do safely. And that's where my specialty comes in is I can help you get out of pain too, but I can also help you rebuild that foundation so that way you not only can get back to doing what you want to do, you can get back to doing it and drastically reduce your risk of injury in the future. So
Love it. What's the big takeaway people need to have?
Your body is it's an unbelievable, amazing thing. And just know that for the most of us, and this is a huge responsibility taker, it's responding to the input into the system. And once you take that responsibility and start treating your body as this just phenomenal vessel, like it can do wonders. I've seen people with fibromyalgia, I've seen people with some serious conditions work through them and create a life that they never thought that they could imagine with just some hope and some hard work. So
that's awesome. So everybody, like and subscribe, follow along, share it with people, share it everywhere, message us. If there's a topic you would like us to discuss, that's another good one. Throw us questions and we can discuss it on the podcast. Todd and I just love riffing on stuff. Is there anything else you want to say, Todd?
No, that's it. Yeah, if you have any questions, please reach out.
Message us. We love combos.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. See you.
Bye-bye.